Shabbat Shalom. Sometimes it's hard to wrap our head around some of the mitzvot. As I mentioned at the outset of this portion, there are many different passages which cause different people different degrees of consternation. However, I make you bet there is one passage in here that everybody, when they read it, felt a nice, warm, fuzzy glow. Ve'havta l're'echa kamocha. You will love your fellow, your neighbor, as yourself. Fits perfectly on a bumper sticker, especially in the Hebrew, because it's a lot shorter. And it seems to really be that sort of high ideal, the universal uplift that we are looking for when we come to synagogue. The problem, of course, is that it takes a lot more than just a nice phrase to make the sentiment of the nice phrase a reality. But there is another problem with it that I think we may be too quick to discount. What is actually being asked for? Ve'ahavta, you will love. Can you command love? God has decreed that we love others. Therefore, aye, Captain, I will now love. Is that how the emotion of love works in us? I am sure that Seth and Lori, nobody commanded you to love each other. It just sort of happened. And I would think that most of us have felt much the same way throughout our lives. Yes, we may be predisposed to love members of our family that we have grown up with, or not, depending upon the situation. But no one commanded us to love. So we must look to other aspects of this unique commandment to try and discover what is not unique about it. That is to say, this is not the only place in the Torah that we are commanded to love. The most famous, of course, is the one that we recite twice a day. We will love God. Ve'ahavta. It's literally the prayer known by this word, ve'ahavta. You will love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. Set these words which I command you, etc., right? We are familiar with this. I hope I'm not shocking you by this idea that there is a commandment to love God. Okay, well, there perhaps it's a little bit easier. We're only being commanded to love one, that is to say, the one, ha'echad, as opposed to love all of the people around you, which might make a difference. And of course, we are being commanded to love God, and if we stop and think for just a moment, there is much that God has done to earn our love. Our very existence, for example, the very existence of a world in which to exist. That might predispose us towards love. The fact that we are able to be alive, aware of ourselves, and enjoy our life to whatever degree we have, any of that is the responsibility entirely of God. So maybe that love is more of an easier task because we are paying back for that. But if you were continuing to read along with our Torah portion today, past the greatest hits section, you will have noticed as we rounded towards the end of chapter 19, we were commanded to love someone else as well. Anybody paying attention, apart from those who were actually reading that section? Our kinsfolk, that's re'echa, right? That's the first one we get, where it's our kinsfolk or our neighbor or our fellow. There's many different translations of re'echa. But there is another non-kinsfolk that gets love at the end. The stranger, hager. We are commanded to love the stranger by the end of chapter 19. And we are even given a reason for loving the stranger, or perhaps motivation, or perhaps a reminder that we should not be surprised by this particular commandment. You should love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. So new? I may have been a stranger in the land of Egypt, and I didn't receive a whole lot of love there. We just celebrated a whole holiday about that aspect. Why does that mean I am now obligated to show love to someone else that is a stranger in my country, when I am no longer the stranger, but am now the native born, now the native of the land? Because we know it's the right thing. Because first of all, we know what it feels like when you are not loved, when you are the stranger. When, as the stranger, you are vulnerable to oppression, that a way that even a peasant within an ancient society was not vulnerable. A peasant would at least have some family looking out for them. A stranger would have nothing. But the Talmud opens up another possibility of why we would understand from our own alienation in Egypt what it is like to be a stranger and why this should change our attitude. It is because, says the Talmud, you should not attack another person for the blemish, the mum, that is within you. This has been paraphrased throughout history of, before you complain about the splinter in someone else's eye, remove the timber from yours, first without sin, cast the stone. There have been paraphrases, not surprisingly, coming out of our tradition that refer to this sort of issue of, well, you were a stranger. So why do you think being a stranger is so bad? You know what it is like to be a stranger, and that doesn't just mean you know what it's like to be oppressed as a stranger. You know that strangers are not inherently bad, because you were one. So if you know that strangers are not inherently bad because, well, you were a stranger, you were not inherently bad, then when you are now no longer the stranger and a stranger from another place comes into your area, you must look at them the same way and say, well, when I was a stranger, I wasn't evil, so this stranger is no reason for me to think that he or she is evil either. That the blemish that I had, or at least was accused of having, my strangeness, I recognize is not actually a true evil, and certainly is not something that should be used to oppress another person. And so likewise, when I see someone in that same situation, I should give them the same benefit of doubt that should have been given to me. I should recognize from my own experience that their strangeness is not actually alienating. But how do we put this into practice? Because Rabbeinu Yonah, one of the great Spanish sages of the 13th century, he argued that there was a fundamental challenge for most of us. He says, it works fine when you read Hillel that talks about loving others and having this be the centerpiece and to be like a disciple of Aaron, of Ohev Shalom, V'rodef Shalom, to love peace and pursue peace, that all of these commandments come together to teach us this great truism. He says there's a problem, which is that a lot of people can really get that in their heart and then do nothing with it. That you can get that feeling. You know what? I got nothing against a stranger. You know what? I got nothing against my neighbor. I am perfectly fine with them. I love them to bits. And that's the extent of their love. That the emotion has, perhaps, let's give the benefit of the doubt, has risen to the level of true love. But, says Rabbeinu Yonah, there is no action that goes with it. And the commandments of the Torah are commandments of action. They are not commandments of just what is in our mind. When we say we will love the Lord our God with all our heart, with all our spirit, and with all our might, it then follows on, and set these words which I command you today upon your heart. And you will teach them, and you will write them on the doorposts of your house, and you will wear them as tefillin. We then go on with a list of things that we will do because of that love. And that's what we also see when it comes to loving our neighbor and loving our stranger. Our tradition tells us these are not just about telling us to have an emotional state, which is awfully difficult to ensure, but it's actually about telling us how to behave. That when we deal with our fellow, or we deal with a stranger, that we have to be sure that we treat them with the love we would give ourselves. Kamocha. You will love them as you love yourself. Now Ramban, another one of the great Spanish sages, a little bit later, argued that this means letting go of jealousy. That when we are seeing someone else within our circle, whether they be native-born or whether they be a stranger, we must fight to avoid jealousy, which means we must fight against fighting them succeeding. When we see them on the verge of some accomplishment, we must restrain ourselves from trying to take away that accomplishment. When we see them in need, we must work towards helping them, rather than being jealous that we are having to expend resources in order to help them. We must not begrudge them what they need or what they accomplish, but instead must recognize that we do not live within a zero-sum society. That we do not live at the cost of someone else, and they do not live at our expense either. But instead, each of us contributes into the community, and in the process, all of us benefit from the outcome. The same way that I can be perfectly fine and comfortable paying taxes, to educate someone else's child, knowing that that child's education will be a valuable part of my community, we can be happy for others, whether they be native-born or strangers to our land, when they receive the assistance, the help, and success that they have deserved. Letting go of jealousy is the first step towards actually preventing ourselves from taking the wrong action and maybe even encouraging us to take more positive action for those that are in need. But there is, I still think, beyond all of the calls towards loving the stranger, towards loving the neighbor, a fundamental problem. Because you see, in all of these three statements, the ve'ahavta towards God, the ve'ahavta towards our fellow, the ve'ahavta towards the stranger, there is a spoken and yet unspoken element. We are told, ve'ahavta l'reyecha kamocha. You will love your neighbor as, which means there is a fourth commandment of love. You have to love yourself. Because otherwise, how can you love the stranger? How can you love your fellow? How even can you know what it is to love and then love God if you do not love yourself? This is put on that side of the balance. You will love the stranger as yourself. You will love your fellow as yourself. If there is no self over here, then how will I know when I have properly fulfilled the command to love them? If I do not feel worthy of love, if I do not feel like I am deserving of love, if I have looked inside and found myself to be a horrible wretch, recognizing all my own flaws, all my own problems, all of the sins that I have committed that perhaps no one has ever found out about, or they have found out about, but they still put up with me for some reason, but I don't think I deserve it, how will I ever imagine someone else deserves love? How will I ever be able to open my heart to someone else if I don't think I would be worthy were I in their shoes? This is the perverse obverse of you were a stranger in a strange land. We are supposed to learn from that as we were strangers and yet still worthy of love and affection, as God demonstrated through the celebration of Pesach, that we should recognize others are also in need of love and affection. But sadly, too often, we look inside and we doubt our own merit for being loved, and then we mirror that outwards, imagining that others are equally unworthy of love, and therefore I should not open my heart to them either. It is as though we went into slavery, and when we came out, we decided the best thing to do was to become a slaver, because all of us were just commodities. That's how I was treated, that's how I'll treat them. Now, I'm not saying that we have that within Judaism with regards to slavery, but too often I have met others that have felt broken in their heart, broken within themselves, and fundamentally unlovable. And that often is reflected in their behavior of others around them. As I mentioned in the introduction to the Haftarah from Ezekiel, with the corruption of our nation at that collapse of the first temple, everybody felt that there was a knife poised at everyone's back. Therefore, you might as well stab the other guy before he stabs you. And that led to the destruction of that first temple. Indeed, that same underlying principle led to the destruction of the second temple as well. When we believe that the rest of the world is not deserving of love, because we are not deserving of love, then we cannot square that equation of love others as yourself. Or rather, we do square it, and it ends up to be zero on both sides of the equal sign. If I am not worthy, they are not worthy. If I get zero love, they get zero love. When God commands us to love each other, He is trying to command us to love ourselves as well. And that is not just a platitude or an emotion. Remember, commandments are for action. It is to remind us to do things for ourselves, to be good to ourselves, to recognize that as we are human, we are worthy of love without having to measure up to a standard of perfection. And so it is okay to treat ourselves with dignity, with kindness, with compassion, and with forgiveness when we do make mistakes. And when we have practiced that on ourselves, you will realize it is much easier to do that for others as well. When you recognize that you are a worthwhile human being simply by virtue of existing, that you are deserving of love simply by being alive, that it does not need to be earned, but it can be freely given, as indeed existence has been freely given by God. You will recognize that others around you likewise deserve that love, that affection, that help. And that is the key to turning around the attitude of those around us, of recognizing not that each person will somehow measure up and then I will give them their just deserts, but to recognize that in God's eyes that person is already worthy or else they wouldn't exist. And thus I will treat them with love and respect, sometimes with caution and sometimes with reprimand when necessary, but always with love and respect. This is the fundamental truth that the Holiness Code is trying to tell us throughout this centerpiece of Vayikra. Indeed, the centerpiece of the entire Torah, if you count out left and right down the scroll. This is the heart of what Torah is calling us to recognize about our existence. The various rituals, the various ethical considerations, the civil and criminal legislation is all designed to help reinforce this fundamental idea. God called this world into existence so you could be here. You are already worthy of the love. You're already worthy of the affection of the Creator. You don't have to measure up further than that. You should be inspired to do more, to be as best of a person as you can be. But whatever mistakes you may have made, whatever flaws you may think are built into your character, whatever crimes you hold yourself responsible for, those do not strip you of your humanity, and it does not rob you of your right to love. When that is recognized, then we can work together to build a society, to build a community, to build families, to build organizations that at their heart recognize the humanity, the dignity, the right to be loved of all members. That will go a long way towards avoiding the many different catastrophes, crises, and disasters that we see around the world that rise again and again. It is not easy. God never said it would be. It is not something that comes naturally to us, else it would not have to be commanded. But ultimately, it is the core in which we will find the fulfillment of Torah in all of its myriad of details. It is at the heart of what God wants from us as people, what God wishes for us as humans. It is the commandment you should work most seriously to take to heart. And through that heart, find love for all, including yourself. Shabbat Shalom.